Hello, listeners, and welcome to the third and final part in this mini series on seeking justice against sexual abuse in faith based groups. For early access to ad free full length episodes, you can head to patreon.com/the Cult Vault and support the show from as little as £1 a month. But for now, here is Carol M. Murchison. In between all of those down periods as well, where the lawyers like yourself are trying to get over the hurdles to have the information to feed back to clients who are eagerly waiting, I imagine, in most cases, for an update, for some type of progress, to hear any news about what's happening. There's still that thing in the background that's happening where there are cult leaders and cult groups that have been served legal papers and will know that they should feel uncomfortable. So even when things are not moving, there is still that kind of satisfying feeling that, there's still
Yes,
people that know they've been found out, or
yes,
that people are no longer gonna keep silent about what's happened to them. So that's still kind of, that's still kind of
it
satisfying.
is. I hadn't thought of that, but you're absolutely right. It goes back to what you said in the beginning, I think, when we were talking about the fact that just having them called on the carpet, that narcissist who has all of that control has no control. So this narcissistic cult participant in this case has no control. The organization that this sex predator of a child was in and who was enabled by has no control because
No.
the court is going to decide it on a completely different issue, and they may win, but they've had to fight it for 2 years. And that is, you're right, I think that's a tremendous satisfaction. And also, during the down times, this is what I hope. At least what I hope is that during the down times, the times when nothing is happening, that what we want people to feel is that we're carrying the battle, that we have the weapons, that we are that you are not having to carry this alone anymore. So it's not this guy, who was 15 and raped having to do this. It is having a team of people around him who are willing to fight for it. And that brings, I hope, some solace, some comfort.
There's been so many cases of extreme cult activity that has happened when the leader has been questioned or put under certain pressure because people have walked away, because outsiders have started to take notice, because law enforcement have started to get involved, whether that means that the leader goes on the run, is on the FBI's most wanted
Mm,
list, moves a
mhm.
group out to the jungles of South America, whatever that
Yes,
looks like. There are so many cases in history where you can see the pressure of not being in total control of everybody can make a leader unravel. And in some cases, that, of course, has ended in tragedy. But in some cases, it's just ended in the group dissolving, just
yes.
just dissolving. I've read it in memoirs. I read it in Durette Bouillon's memoir, An Everyday Cult. Sometimes when one or two people leave, that is enough for people to just be like, why, what are we doing here? Why do we let ourselves be treated this way? And then everybody, and it just disbands, and it can happen as simply as that. So this this individual who's been waiting 2 years to
Yes.
get over this next hurdle, that pressure on that person that he's brought this lawsuit against for the abuse, for the exploitation, for the horrific treatment of a 15-year-old child, that pressure enough might be changing lives from the inside, and we might never know about that.
Yeah, I think that's right. Yes, it's as we were talking before about how seeds get planted, it's very much um that that we need to have more public awareness that these things are wrong. I know in my own experience that after I did the first investigation and corroborating of women's stories of sexual assault, that I had women coming to me saying, I didn't even know that this was wrong. And when I say that to people, they say, how is that possible? Everyone knows that rape is wrong. But what they're not recognizing is that the context in which sexual assault takes place makes a difference. And so I had one woman say to me, well, I guess it's true. If this had happened to me in a dark alley by a stranger, I would have known I'd been raped. But because it was a teacher and I had been taught the things that I had been taught that we've been talking about, I didn't recognize it. I was told it was a spiritual practice. I was taught that. And I think about the gymnasts who were assaulted by Larry Nassar.
Mm.
They didn't recognize it because of the context, right? Because he was the coach, because their parents in some cases were in the room. So the context matters in what people understand about what happened to them. And that's why the statutes of limitations have to be longer, because a seed has to be planted, or 10 years later, somebody has to say to them, sweetie, you were raped, for them to understand.
I just had a thought that hadn't even occurred to me until you mentioned about understanding an experience. And if it would have happened in an alleyway, I would have known. What do you do when it comes to purity, culture, and the lack of sex and relationship education in high demand religious groups where women may not realize that they are having non-consensual sex and men may not realize that they are having sex with their wives without their wives' consent?
That's like a question that's above my pay grade. Sometimes I have to say, I'm just the lawyer, because there's a lot of our society that does not understand consent, whether they're in a high demand group or not. That are, there are a lot of men that feel that they do not, a lot of young men in universities, for example, who do not understand consent. We need tremendous amount of education around the issue of consent.
We're speaking in in quite binary terms through a lot of this terminology as well, in terms of women's rights movement, the equal rights movement, sexual harassment in the workplace typically being between men and women. With any of these cases, do you come across members of the LGBTQIA plus community who are navigating their own lawsuits of sexual misconduct in faith-based groups? And does that law or do those procedures look any different for a marginalized community group, or would it be the same in terms of the binary sense of men and women?
I think here's what the way that I think about it. The way that I think about it is, and I think I said it before, the law is gender neutral. So we have this vision of the law, of the statue of the justice with her, with a blindfold. It should not matter. It should not matter, because the law, and by that I mean the law as it is written on paper. Now, when we're talking about marginalized groups like LGBTQ, then of course not all states have those laws. Not all states protect those marginalized groups. A number of states do. So the point is that the law on paper should be gender neutral. It should be, it should not be looking at any of those things. But we would be naive if we did not think that the whole system and process that we're involved in is that we have to recognize it's run by human beings who have a lot of different views on these topics, and their experiences and what they've been taught, and the insularity of some of the communities that they live in mean that they're on juries and they do not see things necessarily in the same way. So it's a system run by humans on a law that is should be blind to those kinds of considerations. I personally feel, having worked with both men and women in the kinds of cases that I run, that men have a different but equally difficult challenge to deal with when they have been sexually assaulted. They are running against some kind of cultural bias of who is a victim and who is a survivor. And I think that they're running against a cultural picture of what men are. So they have an uphill struggle, perhaps in a different way, but no less difficult a way than women do.
Thank you for answering that question, Carol. I appreciate that. I often try and think about what the picture looks like for everyone. And I think if you're a person and a crime has been committed against you as an individual, that's it. As you said, that's all that really needs to be said. So I have a listener. Hello, Pamela, if you're listening. She messages me occasionally and we talk about Kundalini yoga. I think that's an interesting group to look at, because if you trace back the history of where the group started, Yogi Bhajan, the founder and leader of 3HO, which still exists today, influenced a lot of other cultic groups to start up. I think of the Source family with James Edward Baker, who followed Bhajan around for a long time, took a lot of influence from him, created his own group, which ended after James Edward Baker dived off a cliff trying to paraglide for the first time and just kind of landed in the sand and died on the beach. Which is ironic because, you know, he told his followers that he couldn't die. So 3HO and Kundalini yoga, that still exists today. It's not one of these groups that fizzled out over time. It's still very influential. Is this one of the groups that you've worked with, or a group that's aligned with the teachings of Yogi Bhajan?
Well, I would say that I have not worked with this group, but I have worked with similar groups, and who have also not fizzled out. In fact, I often think of cult leaders as being like cats who have 9 lives. You know, they often kind of fall from view and then reemerge in another place, another name, but the same kind of process of manipulating people. But I have been with other yoga groups, and they are still in, they are still in existence. But I guess that the short of being able to put them out of business, which is not always possible, that the only thing that you can do is to make the pain that we've been talking about difficult enough, painful enough, that they have to change. So what I see is that so far, they've been under no pressure to change. I think that was the case with Yogi Bhajan. I think that these things are handed down through the lineage, the kind of what I have seen in the groups that I have worked with, a kind of lineage of sexual assault. And I don't know. I do know that 3HO has been involved. Their current organization leadership has been involved in some kind of reparations program. I don't know about how it is working, but the hope always is, whether we're talking about a religious organization or a business organization, that the pain is enough that it forces them to change, because I no longer believe that we can ask them to change and have them agree to do it because they see the error of their ways. They don't. And so for me, where I'm sitting, it's all about how much pain will it take. And I think that's what's happened there. Would you agree with if I don't know who you're speaking of, but I do know a Pamela involved there. And there we have a situation where a person came forward and said, this is crazy. This is not what it looks like to those of you looking from the outside in.
Yeah, yeah. It was Yogi Bhajan I thought of immediately when you talked about yoga groups and lineage, because there was this whole controversy over
Yes.
whether he was a true yogi or not to begin with, and how they went on this big
Yes.
escapade to trace his history, and they weren't able to do it, basically confirming that he wasn't who he said he was at the very beginning of
Yes.
this group. And yet here we are today. And the interesting thing about my conversation with Pamela was a few weeks ago, she said, you should interview this incredible lawyer called Karen Murtason, who's doing all this stuff around sexual misconduct in religious groups. And then she told me about some of the work that you've done. So she mentioned Project Sunshine, which you've already talked to us about, but she also mentioned Project Satya.
Yes, I love both of these groups for similar reasons. So Buddhist Project Sunshine was about I told you the first investigation that I did, and it was it was shining a light. That was the sunshine. It was like, we need to shine a light on this, and that is really, really the case. And the other thing that it did was it, of course, created a public group discussion about this. So one of the things, as you know, that happens in cults is there can be no discussion. There can't be any, oh my goodness, the leader sexually assaulted me. Let's talk about that. What is that about? No, that cannot happen, because the whole thing is framed as the leader is infallible. So the Buddhist Project Sunshine was great because Andrea Wynn created a community of people, and she started just on her own pursuing this. And when I met her and volunteered to do an investigation and to corroborate what the women were saying, then things became very public, and the leader stepped down or stepped away. The board stepped down because, of course, they were aware but did not do anything. All of those kinds of things. So this, what I think of as a grassroots community organization that supports the discussion and then supports the survivors who have been silenced all of these years. It's like, this is a great, great template for what needs to be happening, particularly in larger cults like 3HO, like any number of them that are out there, where we know that there has been this assault. So Project Satya. So this was in response to one woman who came forward in December of 2019 and said, my yoga teacher has assaulted me for all of these years. Now, this was, of course, somebody who was dead, but was supposed to have been celibate. That's the whole celibacy thing. And so she came forward on her own many, many years after all of this had happened. Not unusual. People sometimes say to me in their kind of disbelieving voice, well, why didn't they say something sooner? And I feel like saying, what? Go away. Never mind. But I generally try to respond nicely. And I say, because trauma has that effect on people. These organizations have that effect on people. But in any case, Project Satya was formed after this woman came forward, they put together a Facebook page. They had 3 moderators of the page. They invited people to come there and to support this woman. And that is what they did. And it made a huge difference. Both Buddhist Project Sunshine and Project Satya in how things unfolded after that, because their support of the first woman who came forward gave so much permission and freedom and safety that other people came forward. And then things began to change. Now, they haven't changed in all of the ways that they need to change yet, but that grassroots organization made that possible, because otherwise each and every one of those women is out there on their own, and they need the support of the community. They need people to say to them, thank you, this is really courageous and brave of you to do this, we support you. That's what's needed.
And when you talk about that security and that safety that is cultivated by these groups that are put together by individuals, this is the difference between a false sense of security and a coercive and destructive cult-like environment, and a not cult-like environment where people are actually truly in a safe space, supported by people who have no agenda other than supporting one another, listening to one another, social change and justice. This is when people say, well, what does a good cult look like then? I would say this is more like, if good cults exist, if benign cults exist, this is what they look like. Destructive cults are the ones where they tell you you're safe and you absolutely are anything but.
Yes. Yeah, I think that is true. I would say that it's hard to, as I said in the beginning, hard to define a cult, but they by the very virtue of the fact that they are willing to listen and to support and to make change, that they can't even fall into the cult definition, because that is what cults are not able to do. They are not able to change because there's only one person, and that person has to be right. I
Yeah.
sometimes wonder, whether our world has become so complicated for us as human beings that we are more and more seeking some kind of false sense of comfort that somebody else is going to make decisions for us. I wonder, like, sometimes people will say to me, well, but what's wrong with the person who joins a cult? Like, why do they do that? As if this whole thing were their fault. And I often tell people, well, first of all, people are born into these situations, so they have no opportunity to have any other point of view. There's nothing wrong with them other than the having been born into it. Another thing is that I think that people who have been traumatized as children or young adults are seeking some kind of spiritual path and healing that this appears to give them. And the third thing that I would say is that as human beings, we are made to trust other human beings. Trust is what makes civilization move forward. And so if our fault is that we were too trusting, that's not really our fault. It's the fault of the person who takes advantage of that trust. And I would like for people who are surviving and moving into thriving from cult experiences to realize that it isn't about something that they did wrong. It's about what somebody else did wrong.
I always think about Esther Friedman calling her time in her destructive group a misadventure. And I think that that is, it's, it's kind of tongue-in-cheek, enjoyable terminology that because she's got a very funny sense of humor, Esther Friedman. But it's also recognizing that there's no victim blaming in the term
No,
misadventure. And I think that
no,
that is, it's playful, but it's also recognizing that actually it wasn't Esther's fault. So sometimes I
right.
do like to use that term when people talk about like, my tenure in a group, or
Yes.
misadventure. And in terms of trying to have simplicity in life or for someone else to take responsibility for our decision makings from time to time, something that I've talked about a lot recently is the current climate that we are living in, both the actual
Mm-hmm.
climate and the
Yes.
socio-economic climate, the political climate. And I often go back to periods in history where we've seen this before, where cults popped up at the turn of the century, where cults popped up in the 60s and 70s, where there was war, where there was a big gap between the rich and the poor, where there was a cost of living crisis, where there was mistrust with the government because people are lying about things. I mean, just look at the former president of the United States of America and
Let's
all
not.
these I mean, all these indictments and all of these things that are
Yes.
happening, and no one knows what
Yes.
the truth is. And people, one news station says one thing and one says another. It's being glamorized to slave yourself for 14, 16 hours a day at work for minimum wage. It's being glorified like you should have this
Yes.
really strong work ethic and really still not be able to afford to live. It's such a strange time. And when you put technology into the spin, when you put this huge development with artificial intelligence that's just happened in the last couple of weeks, with chat gpt becoming something that
Yes.
members of the public can use, it's a very strange time. What we didn't have at the turn of the century and in the 60s and 70s that we have now are virtual community spaces
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
and online cultic groups. So we're really in a precarious time where individuals who want to take advantage of people, that want to exploit people for their own gain, they're going to be finding people that just don't
Yes.
want the pressure of having to make decisions anymore, that don't know which
Absolutely.
political party to vote for, that don't know how to get out of the Groundhog Day feel of I'm just working to live. Um,
Right.
I'm just sorry, I'm just living to work. There's probably a lot of people in the world that feel exactly how you've just explained, Carol, and this kind of um climate in the world. We've just lived through a pandemic as well, so there is that to consider. There's all these fuel costs going up. There's trains derailing all over the place. I read something about a meteor crashing in Vegas or Texas. The world is just in a wild place.
Right. Who could blame a person who seeks a simpler life? I think that's the kind of the thing of what you're describing is that we have decision fatigue, we have all kinds of fatigue, and that it's and my point on this is that again, who could blame people who want something simpler? We have
Mm.
no connection with nature. We're destroying the planet. I mean, there's a lot to be, there's a lot that would drive a sane person, a thinking person, a smart person to want something simpler. To me, what we always have to look at is the person who manipulates and takes it for their gain, as opposed to the person who is idealistic and looking for something better, more spiritual in their life. Those are good
Mm.
things.
So Pamela also mentioned to me about your book.
Ah,
And I wondered if you could tell the listeners about This is Mexico and where people can find a copy of This is Mexico.
yes. Well, so, in my retirement, having been a lawyer, I was used to, you know, working a lot. And so when I retired, I moved to Mexico with my husband, and we intended to move here for like a year. We thought it would be something to like kick off retirement with. And so that was in 2005. And right now I am sitting in Mexico. And so it's been quite a few years now that we've been here. So I started writing because I was in the midst of people saying to me things like, "Oh my God, you moved to Mexico? You'll be dead in a month." That that kind of thing. And so I started writing emails to my family and then my friends, talking about the kind of unbelievably resourceful, resilient, beautiful culture and people of Mexico, which, just like the United States, has its own problems, to be sure. And then eventually I started writing essays, and eventually I put all of the essays into a book that is called This is Mexico: Tales of Culture and Other Complications. And so it's kind of a book of humor and sadness at the same time. Sadness of a country that is so rich in so many ways, but for whom many of its citizens are continuing to be way too poor. And it's about how living here changed my perspective on life itself. And it's on Amazon. So for anyone who would like a copy, thank you for that. That's been quite some time ago.
I'll definitely put a link to that in the episode description. I think there's a theme in your work, Carol, that is, rooting for the underdog in all
It is.
possible in all the ways possible.
It absolutely is. I have come to recognize that, and uh, and I feel quite strongly about it. And you're right. It manifests in my feeling about Mexico, which is definitely what I think of as an understood, misunderstood culture, particularly by the United States and other Western countries, including the UK, where it is simply not. It is not understood. The richness of its indigenous population, the richness of the people, and the strength of community that they have, it doesn't translate as easily into the Western view of the world as it might. So that was my small contribution. Thank you.
And for help with that translation, you can pick up your copy of This is Mexico. In terms of your workload right now, just to kind of finish up today, I wondered if you could tell the listeners how many cases do you have open, and do you expect any of them to be concluding anytime soon?
Now, the legal system, it's a long process. We probably have. So I just to put this into context, I have a small group within McAllister Olivarius, which is in Maidenhead, just outside of London, and our small group is focused solely on sexual misconduct in spiritual communities. And as you've alluded to earlier, that includes Christians. It includes, Catholicism, all kinds of Christian denominations, as well as other groups that are not necessarily viewed as religions, perhaps by the Western world, but are spiritual or cult organizations. So we have a small group. We're in our first, I would say, first 2 or 3 years of bringing these kinds of cases. And so we have them in a variety of stages. I would say that within our group, we have probably in queue, with a number that are being brought and a number that are waiting to be brought, probably about 14 cases.
Wow.
And so we're in federal court, we're in state court, we're in Canada, we're in the United States, and we are in different stages of the litigation process, which is a long, if you think about it as that track with the hurdles there, we're just constantly moving forward and going over the hurdles.
I was talking to my partner last night about this upcoming interview, and I told him that you're probably one of the most sought after individuals in the country of America right now, because I seem to hear so many stories of individuals being sexually abused as children, as young adults, as adults in spiritual groups and faith-based communities. But again, perhaps that's just my echo chamber because all I do is this work. I don't want to believe that that is all that humanity is. Otherwise, I might lose my mind. But that being said, a lot of people that listen to this show will be individuals that have had those experiences. So if they felt like they wanted to pursue their own lawsuit, is that something that you would be able to help them with or direct them to people that could?
Absolutely. So the way that it generally works, and it has certainly worked this way with other podcasts that have been done. Somebody hears you talking, they're in your loyal audience base, and they say, wow, maybe I'm ready to do this, but I don't know whether there's a possibility. So what we do, what we'll do, Casey, is I will give you the law firm's uh, email, I'm sorry, their website address is what I meant to say, and they can go on the website, they can look and see what our group is doing, and there's a contact form on there where they can send us a message. I see every single message that comes into the law firm, and when I see one that is like this, where people are saying, I heard you talking with Casey and I want to talk with you, then we're going to talk with you. And so what we're going to be doing is assessing, is it possible? So we're going to be, we're looking at all of those hurdles that we have to overcome. We're going to see about the statute of limitations, where it took place, all of those kinds of things. But we're going to do a kind of just a little intake of those things, and then we're going to let you know what we think. If sometimes we can't take a case, then we might give you some information about somebody else. Sometimes it's because we don't practice in a particular state, and so we might refer you out there. But what that stage of it is just advising. And just so your listeners know as well, because a lot of people, clearly, why should they be familiar with the legal system if you're lucky you haven't been involved in it? But in these kinds of cases, we take cases on what we call a no-win, no-fee. So we don't ask people for money. When we feel that we can win a case, we don't take a case we can't win, because we're not going to take you down that road to failure if we can help it. But the whole thing is based on you're not needing money up front to pay lawyers. It's a way that law has developed in the United States, at least, of saying this should be accessible to everyone. So we'll share the risk with you. In fact, we will carry the risk on the financial end. And so that's something that people ought to know, because a lot of people say to me, well, I can't afford a lawyer.
Especially when you're coming up against huge faith-based groups that have billions of dollars in revenue and some of the most cutthroat, experienced, and dodgy lawyers.
Yes, absolutely. That and many other obstacles. You just can't we can't make financial stability a part of bringing justice to people, or else we've failed as a society.
So, if anybody listening feels as though they have a case that they would like to bring to Carol and her team, and they're wondering, is it possible? Carol would say, that depends.
Yeah,
Fill out the
that's right.
form on the website and we will find out. We'll talk to you about it and we'll see what the answers are to those questions. And I think it's obvious from my conversation with you today, Carol, that survivors' well-being, the voices of survivors, what is best for them, that is at the forefront of your mission. It's clear that those are the values that you hold in yourself as an individual, even if you were working with a law firm or independently. It's clear that you are a person that wants to help people. So I think that there could be a few individuals reaching out to you after our conversation today. I genuinely could speak to you all day. I feel like I've just barely scratched the surface on all of the things that I want to ask you. You've had such an incredible life of working in law, and now in your 70s, in your retirement, you're here still working with no signs of slowing down. I just think it's absolutely incredible work. It's changing lives. It's going to change policy. It's going to change law. It's going to change how the world works. And we've talked about lineage. We've talked about legacy. We've talked about how current cult leaders learned from the leaders before them and the leaders before them. But it also works on the flip side of that as well. So you could be inspiring people to train themselves and go to law school and understand that this is what they want to do with their lives, and understand that they want to help people in the same way that you've helped them. And I just think it's such amazing work. So thank you so much for your time today, Carol.
Thank you so much for having me. I have enjoyed our conversation immensely, and right back at you on doing the work that you're doing. It makes an enormous difference. The awareness that you're raising it is the thing that makes the difference in the end. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Carol. Enjoy the rest of your day. And thank you to James as well. James, if you tune in, if you listen, thank you for your help in coordinating our conversation today. James had some very nice, kind things to say about the podcast. So big shout out to another listener of the show as well. And I will let you go and enjoy the rest of your beautiful spring day in Mexico, Carol. Take care. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Bye, bye, bye.
Bye.
That is the end of this mini series on seeking justice against sexual abuse in faith based groups. To find out more about Carol's work, you can visit the links in the episode description. And to get in touch with me, you can find me at cultvaultpodcast@gmail.com or follow me on Twitter and Instagram at cultvaultpod. I'm your speaker, Casey, host of the Cult Vault podcast.